I never thought the day would come when my own daughter-in-law would stand in a mahogany-lined boardroom, beneath a crystal chandelier, and dismiss me from the very company I helped build. My name is Sebastian Whitmore, 61 years old, and for 3 decades I carried the Whitmore legacy on my shoulders. I oversaw every contract, every system, every crisis that threatened to break us until today. It was Lady Cassandra Hale Whitmore, my son Edward's ambitious wife, who delivered the final blow. With her polished smile and razor-sharp words, she looked me in the eye and said I was finished. The room fell silent, executives shifting in their leather chairs, waiting for me to break, to plead, to collapse under humiliation. Instead, I smiled. I thanked her. And that was when it happened. One by one, my colleagues, men and women I had trained, guided, and trusted for years, rose from their seats. First Thomas Blackwood, then Victoria Sinclair, then Jonathan Pembroke. Chairs scraped against marble floors as 28 loyal allies followed me out of that opulent chamber. Cassandra's confidence cracked in an instant. I heard Margaret Ashford, our legal director, whisper urgently into the stunned silence. "Call the lawyer. Now." When I was a boy, my father used to tell me that a Whitmore's word was as solid as the stone foundation of Whitmore Manor. We were not simply a family, we were a dynasty. For over a century, the Whitmore name carried weight in commerce, philanthropy, and politics. People lowered their voices when we walked into the room. They stood straighter, adjusted their jackets, as though they were in the presence of something larger than life. I grew into that legacy with both pride and burden. By the time I was 30, I was already running half the operations of Whitmore Holdings, a sprawling empire built on infrastructure, shipping, and later technology. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and I devoted myself to it with the quiet discipline of a craftsman. My son, Edward Whitmore II, was born into that world of mahogany tables, silk curtains, and finely aged Scotch. He had the education, the charm, the name, but little of the grit. Still, I loved him, and I believed he would grow into the role with time. What I did not foresee was the woman who would change the balance of our family forever, Lady Cassandra Hale. Cassandra was dazzling the moment she arrived at one of our family banquets, her gown shimmering like molten gold under the chandelier. She was young, ambitious, with eyes that measured every person in the room as though weighing their worth against her own ambition. She came from the Hale family, new money, clever investors who had made their fortune in pharmaceuticals, but compared to our century-old lineage, they were mere arrivals. Still, Cassandra knew how to play the part. She smiled graciously at Eleanor, my wife, charmed Edward with whispered compliments, and spoke to me with a deliberate deference that felt rehearsed. Within 2 years, Edward married her at our estate. The ceremony was lavish, the kind society papers still publish in glossy spreads. But behind her radiant smile, I sensed something cold, a calculation she could not quite hide. At first, I thought her presence might strengthen Edward, sharpen him, perhaps give him the spine he sometimes lacked. Instead, it was Cassandra who grew stronger, while Edward faded into the role of dutiful husband. She attended board meetings at his side, whispering advice into his ear, interrupting with suggestions that were oddly forceful for someone merely accompanying her husband. It wasn't long before she no longer needed Edward's permission to speak. Her voice carried in the boardroom, and her ideas, while polished, were almost always a rephrasing of strategies I had already presented. Yet, no, not Nicholas, that was the Harrington patriarch in another story. Edward would beam at her as though she had reinvented the wheel. I tried to remain patient. Families evolve, after all, and perhaps Cassandra's energy could be harnessed for the company's benefit. But soon, my contributions were being quietly erased. At quarterly dinners, when Edward toasted to our innovative restructuring, Cassandra's eyes lingered on me with a knowing smirk. My name was absent from press releases. My projects were credited to new leadership initiatives. The first blow came quietly, in the form of an email I was never meant to see. It was forwarded to me by mistake from a junior assistant, young Catherine Fairchild, who worked late nights double-checking correspondence. The email had been authored by Cassandra herself, addressed to several board members. Richard Collins, no, again, in this story it is me. Sebastian is respected, but he is out of step with modern demands. He clings to outdated practices and resists innovative restructuring. It may be time to discuss a transition plan. A transition plan. The words hit like a blade. They weren't suggesting retirement or succession. They were plotting an execution, a carefully orchestrated removal from the empire I had helped build. I confronted Edward the following evening in his study. He shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, glass of bourbon trembling in his hand. "Father, Cassandra only means well," he said. "She thinks the company needs a fresher image." "And you agree with her?" I asked. He avoided my eyes. That silence was worse than betrayal, it was cowardice. Still, I tried to convince myself that loyalty and blood were stronger than ambition. Perhaps Cassandra was merely overzealous. Perhaps Edward would come to his senses. But as weeks passed, I noticed more signs. Colleagues who had once greeted me warmly now hesitated, their eyes darting toward Cassandra before they spoke. Certain files that should have been routed to my office instead appeared in her hands. My own secretary, Jonathan Pembroke, confided in me one late evening, his voice hushed. "Sir, I believe she's positioning herself. Meetings are being scheduled without your knowledge. She's reorganizing the reporting lines." I felt the walls tightening around me, the legacy of my family slowly being stripped away by someone who had married into our name but never carried its weight. And yet, I told myself, dynasties survive storms. Surely this was just a passing squall. Surely the Whitmore name could not be so easily undermined. But deep down, I knew. Cassandra wasn't just aiming to share power. She was aiming to seize it entirely. And the day she did would not come quietly. It would arrive like a dagger plunged in public, before witnesses, in the very boardroom where my ancestors' portraits hung on the walls. Every dynasty carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. I'd read those words once in a history book about fallen empires, and lately they echoed in my mind each time I stepped into the Whitmore boardroom. It began with small things. Seating arrangements. Once, my chair at the head of the long mahogany table was a matter of respect, not protocol. Suddenly, Cassandra suggested I take a seat farther down, closer to the operations team, as she called it. She smiled sweetly as if it were a harmless adjustment, yet it was a subtle demotion. The other board members noticed, though none dared speak. Then came the quarterly reports. For decades, those documents bore my signature, proof of my stewardship. One afternoon, I opened the binder only to find Cassandra's name embossed on the cover. My contributions were listed as collaborative initiatives, while her bullet point vision dominated the pages. I confronted her after the meeting, in the hallway where portraits of my forefathers lined the walls. "You seem eager to take credit for work you haven't done," I told her. Cassandra didn't flinch. She tilted her chin, her voice calm and dangerous. "Perception is everything, Sebastian. The board doesn't care who stayed up until 3 in the morning rebuilding contracts. They care about who looks like they're leading. You still do the work, if you like. I'll make sure it shines." It was the first time she dropped the mask, and I understood then, she wasn't playing assistant to Edward. She was building her own throne. At family dinners, the shift was even clearer. Lady Eleanor, my wife, would comment on my long hours, her diamond rings catching the candlelight. Cassandra would nod sympathetically and add, "Yes, Sebastian works very hard, but he struggles with work-life balance. We can't have a leader who looks perpetually exhausted in front of investors." Edward would say nothing, eyes fixed on his plate, sipping wine as though it could drown his discomfort. The worst moment came during a gala we hosted for industry leaders at Whitmore Manor. Cassandra floated through the ballroom in an emerald gown, the very image of power and grace. She introduced herself not as Edward's wife, but as executive director at Whitmore Holdings. I nearly choked on my drink. Executive director. It was not a title we had ever conferred upon her. Yet people believed her, applauded her, leaned in to hear her insights on our growth strategy. She didn't just borrow authority, she wore it like a crown. That evening, I stepped onto the balcony to gather myself, and that's when Thomas Blackwood, my most trusted lieutenant, joined me. He was younger, but sharp, and had stood by me through 2 major crises. His face was grim. "She's been hosting private lunches with several department heads," he said quietly. "People think it's harmless networking, but she's asking questions about system access, contracts, even about you. She's moving pieces on a board most of us can't see." I clenched the balcony railing. "Why do they follow her?" Thomas gave me a sad smile. "She's convincing, sir. She tells them change is coming and that aligning with her ensures stability. Fear is persuasive. But you still have loyal people. More than you realize." I wanted to believe him. Yet each passing week, I felt the ground shifting. Invitations to key meetings never reached my calendar. Documents disappeared from my desk only to reappear in Cassandra's hands. Then, the email arrived. Not to me, but about me. Young Catherine Fairchild, the sharp-eyed analyst, slipped into my office one evening after everyone had gone. Her voice trembled. "Sir, you should see this." It was Cassandra's email, addressed to several board members. "Sebastian is respected, but increasingly overwhelmed. He often appears fatigued, misses details, and resists innovation. For the good of the company, we should consider leadership restructuring. I recommend a transition timeline within this quarter." I read the words twice, then a third time, until they blurred before me. Cassandra had framed my sacrifices me long nights, my exhaustion as weakness. She had twisted devotion into incompetence. Catherine's eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know who else to tell." I thanked her, though my voice was heavy with resignation. Later that night, I sat in my study beneath the oil portrait of my grandfather, Lord Whitmore I, who had survived the Depression and rebuilt our empire. His stern eyes seemed to bore into me. Would he think me weak for letting Cassandra maneuver so boldly? Or wise for biding my time until I had proof? In truth, I felt both. Still, one conviction hardened within me: if Cassandra wanted a war, she would not win it with whispers alone. The Whitmore name had survived wars, recessions, betrayals. And though Cassandra believed she could rewrite our legacy in silk gowns and polished speeches, I still carried the stone foundation of Whitmore Manor in my veins. But I also knew the storm was no longer distant. It was gathering overhead, thunder rumbling, waiting for the lightning strike. And when it came, it would not be in secret. It would be in that grand boardroom, beneath the crystal chandelier, in front of witnesses who would remember every detail. There is a moment every leader dreads, the midnight call that tells you something has gone catastrophically wrong. Mine came on a Thursday. I had just poured a glass of scotch in my study when Thomas Blackwood appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Sir, we've got a system failure. The main server cluster is down. If we don't act now, we'll lose decades of client data." The words hit like ice water. Client contracts, purchase histories, technical blueprints, our entire empire balanced on that fragile infrastructure. If it collapsed, so would the company's reputation. I grabbed my coat. Within the hour, I was in the operations wing, the sterile glow of screens illuminating anxious faces. Engineers hovered over keyboards, lines of code cascading like rain. The air smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. "Sir, we estimate less than 8 hours before corruption becomes irreversible," said Victoria Sinclair, our data architect, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she spoke. 8 hours, I repeated. "Then let's make them count." I called in the rest of my team. Jonathan Pembroke, the meticulous strategist, already had flowcharts scribbled across whiteboards. Alfred and Arthur Kingsley, the brilliant but eccentric twins, communicated in half-finished sentences, finishing each other's code as though sharing a single mind. Catherine Fairchild balanced her laptop on one knee, running diagnostics faster than I could follow. For the next 36 hours, we became a strange family bound by crisis. We ate cold sandwiches over spreadsheets, shared jokes in whispered exhaustion, and pushed one another past the breaking point only to catch each other before the fall. At 2 a.m., while the servers hummed under emergency power, Jonathan joked, "We're like some sort of dysfunctional aristocracy ruled by caffeine, chaos, and Sebastian's scowl." Laughter rippled through the room, even mine. It reminded me of something my wife, Eleanor, once said: loyalty isn't inherited. It's chosen. That night, I realized she was right. My blood family Edward, Cassandra might betray me, but these people, these colleagues, had chosen to stand with me. By dawn, we had done the impossible. Every file recovered, every client's trust preserved. The data was intact, the empire safe for now. And where was Cassandra during all this? Not at the operations floor. Not in the trenches with us. She was photographed at a gala in the city, sipping champagne, her emerald gown glittering beneath the flash of cameras. The next morning, the company's press release credited her leadership vision for ensuring continuity during an unexpected technical challenge. I read the release twice, bile rising in my throat. My name wasn't mentioned once. Not me, nor the 28 who had sweated through the night to save everything. Thomas found me in my office later, a copy of the release in his hand. "She's taking credit again," he said grimly. I leaned back in my chair, fatigue dragging at my bones. "Let her. We know the truth." He frowned. "But truth doesn't matter if nobody hears it." I didn't respond. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Cassandra was weaving a narrative, and narratives could outlive facts if told loudly enough. 2 days later, she proved it. At a board briefing, Cassandra stood in my usual spot at the front of the room, slides projected behind her. She spoke with confidence, highlighting the strategic resilience of Whitmore Holdings. Investors nodded, impressed. When one asked who had executed the overnight recovery, Cassandra smiled demurely. "My team handled it flawlessly," she said. Her team. Not ours. I felt the blood drain from my face. Thomas clenched his jaw, Victoria's eyes burned with quiet fury, but none of us spoke. Not yet. Afterward, in the hallway, Cassandra cornered me. Her lips curled in that infuriating smile. "You look tired, Sebastian. Maybe it's time you considered stepping back. These kinds of crises are better managed by fresh energy." She didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear: she was positioning herself as the future, and me as the relic of the past. That evening, we gathered again, this time not for a crisis of code, but of conscience. My 28 loyal colleagues met me in the back conference room, the one Cassandra rarely entered. "We need to talk," Victoria said. "She's not just undermining you. She's undermining all of us. If she can erase your contributions, she can erase ours." Alfred Kingsley tapped a pen against the table. "We stood with you through the fire. If they think they can pretend it never happened, then they've underestimated us." I looked around the room at these faces, exhausted, determined, loyal. I thought of my son, Edward, silent at dinners, nodding along to Cassandra's plans. Blood had betrayed me. But here, in this room, I saw my true family. "Then we stand together," I said quietly. No one hesitated. Heads nodded all around. A pact was made, unspoken yet binding. Little did I know, within weeks, that pact would be tested in the most public way possible under the blinding lights of the Whitmore boardroom, where Cassandra would unsheath her dagger. And where 28 people would rise to show her that legacy isn't stolen with words. It's defended with loyalty. The summons came on a Monday morning. A strategic realignment session, the notice read, scheduled in the grand boardroom of Whitmore Holdings. I knew what it meant. After weeks of whispers, erased credits, and Cassandra's subtle machinations, the blade was finally being drawn in plain sight. I dressed with deliberate calm, a navy suit, polished shoes, my grandfather's pocket watch tucked neatly into the vest. If they were going to strip me of my dignity, I would not make it easy. I arrived 10 minutes early, as I always had for 30 years. The boardroom gleamed like a cathedral to wealth. Mahogany paneling, chandeliers dripping crystal, portraits of long-dead Whitmores glaring down as if to remind us that dynasties endure. At the head of the table, Lady Cassandra Hale Whitmore stood already, her emerald blouse catching the morning light. She had taken my place without hesitation. Edward sat beside her, his hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. My own son could not even meet my gaze. The directors shifted uncomfortably as I entered, their leather chairs creaking in the silence. They knew what was about to happen, and none wanted to be complicit, yet none would intervene. Cassandra had spun her web too tightly. "Thank you for coming, Sebastian," she said smoothly, as though this were a normal meeting. "We've reviewed recent performance metrics and leadership assessments. The consensus is clear." Her words cut with practiced precision. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as Chief Operations Director. You have 5 minutes to collect your belongings and vacate the premises." 5 minutes. A career, a lifetime, a legacy condensed into a countdown shorter than a commercial break. The air thickened. Some directors shifted their eyes downward, others pretended to read documents. Edward's jaw tensed, but still he said nothing. My wife Eleanor was not here to witness it, perhaps that was mercy. I looked at Cassandra. She expected anger, begging, maybe even tears. She expected me to crumble so she could stand taller. Instead, I smiled. "Thank you," I said simply. A ripple went through the room. Cassandra blinked, just once, but it was enough. Her carefully curated confidence faltered. I turned to the desk where my papers lay, methodically gathering them. The clicker from my presentation. A folder of contracts. The framed photo of our operations team after last year's record quarter. I placed each item gently into a cardboard box that had been set out for me prepared in advance, another detail in Cassandra's cruel choreography. That was when I heard it, the scrape of a chair against marble. I looked up. Thomas Blackwood stood at the far end of the glass wall, his laptop bag already slung over his shoulder. His face was steady, eyes fixed on mine. Without a word, he walked out. Silence followed, then another sound, the soft thud of Victoria Sinclair's heels as she rose. She gathered her files, closed her laptop, and followed Thomas. Cassandra's smirk vanished. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Neither of them answered. Then it spread. Jonathan Pembroke rose next, then the Kingsley twins, their movements so synchronized it was like a rehearsed performance. Catherine Fairchild gathered her things, her expression fierce with quiet defiance. One by one, the people I had worked beside, mentored, and trusted stood and walked. 28 in total. Chairs scraped, bags zipped, papers rustled. The sound became a symphony of rebellion echoing against marble and wood. I paused, box in my hands, and met Cassandra's eyes. Panic flickered across her face. "This is absurd," she snapped, her voice cracking. "You can't all just leave." It was then that Margaret Ashford, our legal director, leaned forward. Her usually composed face had gone pale. In a whisper, meant only for Cassandra but loud enough for all to hear, she said. "Call the lawyer. Now." The room froze. Cassandra's lips parted, but no words came. The directors glanced at one another, calculating the fallout. They understood, perhaps for the first time, the cost of humiliating me so publicly. I walked toward the door, 28 loyal colleagues falling into step behind me. To the board, it must have looked like an exodus. To me, it felt like vindication. The security officers Tom and Harold, men who knew me for years approached as protocol demanded. "I'm sorry, sir," one murmured. "Don't be," I told him. "You're just doing your job." As we passed through the glass doors, the sound of footsteps multiplied. The rustle of coats, the click of laptops shutting. A procession of loyalty leaving the empire Cassandra thought she had claimed. By the time we reached the elevators, 28 of us stood together. No speeches, no drama, just the silent unity of people who knew dignity mattered more than titles. When the elevator doors closed, I saw one last image through the narrowing gap: Cassandra, frozen in disbelief, her victory crumbling before it ever began. And for the first time in weeks, I felt not humiliation, but freedom. The elevator ride down from the 15th floor had been silent, but my mind was anything but. Every scrape of a chair, every thud of footsteps, still echoed inside me like drums of war. 28 people had walked out with me. 28 people who valued loyalty over fear, dignity over power. Cassandra thought she had orchestrated my humiliation, but what she really did was stage her own undoing. Still, the moment I stepped out of the gleaming lobby and into the bright daylight, the weight of loss hit me. 30 years of service to Whitmore Holdings gone in 5 minutes. The mahogany offices, the empire I had safeguarded, my place at the tablight had all been stripped away. By the time I pulled into the circular driveway of Whitmore Manor, the afternoon sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the estate. The mansion loomed like a monument to all that was slipping through my fingers. Inside, I found Edward pacing the drawing room, still in his tailored suit, tie loosened, hair disheveled. His eyes flicked to the cardboard box in my arms, the same one Cassandra had so smugly provided for me. "Father," his voice faltered, then steadied. "I heard what happened. Cassandra told me you lost control. She said you disrupted the meeting, made a scene, and that security had to escort you out." I set the box down on the marble-topped table with deliberate calm. "Is that truly what you believe? That your father collapsed into hysteria in front of the board?" Edward's jaw clenched. "She wouldn't lie about something like this." I gave a bitter laugh. "Wouldn't she? Edward, she just dethroned me in the most humiliating way possible, and you think she's incapable of lying?" He turned away, staring out the window, unable to answer. His silence was worse than words. It told me where his loyalty lay, and it wasn't with me. That evening, Eleanor found me in my study, the one sanctuary I still claimed within the house. She closed the heavy oak door behind her, her pearls glinting in the lamplight. "I heard," she said softly. Her voice carried neither surprise nor judgment, only sorrow. "They say 28 people walked out with you. Is that true?" "Yes," I answered. "And if you'd been in that room, you'd have seen it for yourself." Cassandra thought she was executing me, but she exposed herself instead. Eleanor sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. "I warned you, Sebastian. Cassandra is ambitious beyond measure. She doesn't care about this family. She only cares about what our name can give her." I studied her face, the woman who had stood beside me for 4 decades. "Then why didn't you say anything sooner? Why didn't you stop Edward from marrying her?" A flicker of guilt passed through her eyes. "Because Edward was happy, or so I thought. And because I've spent my life maintaining appearances, smoothing over scandals, pretending this family is stronger than it is. Perhaps I thought if I ignored the cracks, the walls wouldn't fall." I leaned back, exhaustion pressing down on me. "Well, they've fallen now." She reached across the table, her diamond-ringed hand brushing mine. "You still have something she can never take from you." "And what is that?" "Loyalty," Eleanor whispered. "Blood may betray you, but loyalty chosen freely, that is priceless." Her words brought me no comfort, though I knew they were true. Cassandra had Edward in her grip, and through him, the family company. The Whitmore Empire might still bear our name, but it was no longer ours. Later that night, I sat alone with the contents of the cardboard box spread across my desk. The team photo from last year's milestone. A chipped coffee mug engraved with the company logo. A USB drive containing backups of critical files. Me insurance policy, though Cassandra didn't know it. The door creaked open, and Thomas Blackwood stepped inside. He had followed me from the office, his loyalty unshaken. Behind him came Victoria Sinclair and Jonathan Pembroke. Soon, others joined Catherine, the Kingsley twins, even Harold Beckett, the maintenance man who had raised his mop in defiance before leaving the building. We crowded into the study like conspirators in a rebellion. Pizza boxes replaced silver trays. Laptops glowed on antique desks. "You're not alone, sir," Thomas said firmly. "We may have lost the company, but we haven't lost each other." Victoria added, "We gave Cassandra the win she wanted today. But victories built on lies never last. We'll build something better. Something she can't touch." For the first time since leaving the boardroom, I felt something stir inside me. Despair, not bitterness, but resolve. "Then we start tonight," I said, voice steady. "The Whitmore name may be chained to Cassandra for now, but our future will not be. We'll build our own house stone by stone, loyal hand by loyal hand." The others nodded, determination hardening their faces. In that moment, I realized, my blood family had abandoned me, but my true family, the 28 who stood by me, were right here. And together, we would rise from the ashes Cassandra thought she had scattered. The study had never seen such chaos. For decades it had been a sanctum of quiet authority, lined with leather-bound books, maps of shipping routes, and portraits of ancestors in powdered wigs. Tonight, it was littered with half-eaten pizza slices, tangled laptop cords, and the hum of 28 determined souls. "Sir, with all respect, you can't sit still after what happened today," Victoria Sinclair said, her voice crisp as ever, though exhaustion edged her tone. "Cassandra may control Whitmore Holdings, but she doesn't control us." Her words sparked murmurs of agreement. Jonathan Pembroke cleared a space on the coffee table, laying out rough notes and flowcharts. Alfred and Arthur Kingsley, the twins, were already sketching ideas on sticky notes, arguing in their peculiar shorthand that only they seemed to understand. "This isn't just about loyalty," Thomas Blackwood said, turning to me. "We have the talent, the experience, the trust of clients. Cassandra can steal titles and offices, but she can't command respect. If we walk away quietly, we lose everything. If we build, we gain everything back." I looked around the room. These were not subordinates anymore, they were comrades. Their eyes carried the fire of rebellion, but also of hope. "And what exactly would we build?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. There was a silence, then Catherine Fairchild spoke up, young, ambitious, the same one who had slipped me Cassandra's incriminating email. "We don't need the Whitmore name. We need a new one. Something that says survival, rebirth, strength from ruin." Her words hung in the air. Rebirth. Survival. Arthur Kingsley tapped his pen against the table. "A phoenix?" "Too obvious," Victoria countered. Jonathan's eyes lit up. "What about Aurelius?" "Marcus Aurelius, stoic, resilient, a leader who ruled with philosophy as well as power." The room stilled. Aurelius. A name that carried history, dignity, and gravitas. "Aurelius Dynamics," I repeated, letting the syllables roll in my mouth. "Yes. Dynamics for movement, for energy, for progress. Aurelius for wisdom." A cheer rose, not loud but steady, like the birth of something real. It was then that Beatrice Davenport, the venture capitalist who had once been turned away by Cassandra, appeared at my doorstep. She wore a dark coat, her silver hair glinting under the porch light, and her eyes sparkled with intrigue. "Word travels quickly," she said, stepping into the room as though she belonged. "I heard about your exodus." She studied the chaos pizza boxes, glowing laptops, my weary but resolute team. Then she smiled. "This looks like hunger. And hunger is exactly what I invest in. I frowned. You're here to offer us money? I'm here to offer you a future, she corrected. 5 million in seed funding. 20% equity. A board seat. On one condition. The room fell silent. And what condition is that? I asked. That you lead it, Sebastian. Not Edward. Not Cassandra. You. The man 28 people followed out of the gilded cage. For a long moment, I said nothing. The weight of decades in Whitmore Holdings pressed against me. I had always been a custodian, a caretaker of someone else's vision. Now I was being asked to build something of my own. Thomas leaned forward. Sir, this is our chance. We can't waste it. Eleanor appeared in the doorway then, her presence commanding the room. She looked at me with eyes that carried both sorrow and steel. Do it, Sebastian. Prove to Cassandra that the Whitmore legacy doesn't belong to her. It belongs to the people who still remember what loyalty means. I nodded slowly. Then it settled. Aurelius Dynamics begins tonight. The room erupted into energy. Alfred and Arthur pinned sticky notes to the wall, mapping out infrastructure. Victoria began drafting a pitch deck on her laptop. Catherine secured domain names and social media handles before Cassandra could even think of blocking them. Jonathan drew up an incorporation plan. It was messy, imperfect, and fueled by adrenaline rather than sleep, but it was alive. Beatrice Davenport raised her glass of Scotch me Scotch, poured without asking. To Aurelius, she said. To building from ashes. To Aurelius, we echoed, the sound filling the study, reaching beyond the portraits of Whitmore ancestors who glared down at us. Perhaps they disapproved. Or perhaps, just perhaps, they approved of this defiance. As the night wore on, my study transformed into a war room. Strategy sprawled across the table, server architecture mapped on the whiteboard, investor calls scheduled for morning. The chaos was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt not burdened by duty, but freed by possibility. And deep inside, I knew Cassandra had already lost. She had tried to humiliate me. Instead, she had given me exactly what she feared most, a reason to start anew. When dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight spilled into the room, casting a golden glow over the faces of my loyal team. Exhausted, disheveled, yet unbroken, they were no longer just colleagues. They were Aurelius. And together, we would rise. 3 weeks after the walkout, Aurelius Dynamics was still running out of my study and Eleanor's dining room. We had folding tables pressed against antique sideboards, laptops balanced on stacks of leather-bound law journals, and whiteboards leaning against portraits of my stern ancestors. It was a strange marriage of history and rebellion. Yet somehow, in that chaos, brilliance bloomed. Victoria Sinclair and the Kingsley twins worked night and day refining our infrastructure model. Jonathan Pembroke mapped out client retention strategies so meticulous they looked like blueprints for cathedrals. Catherine Fairchild became our voice online, posting sleek updates that made us look less like a startup with pizza stains and more like an ascendant empire. It was Catherine who brought the news first. She burst into the study, her phone lit up with alerts. Sir, 3 clients just reached out. Henderson Logistics, Fairmont Technologies, and North Shore Pharmaceuticals. They want meetings. The room fell silent. Henderson had been one of Whitmore Holdings' crown jewels, the client Cassandra always flaunted as proof of her leadership. Thomas Blackwood leaned back in his chair, a grin breaking across his usually solemn face. Looks like the clients know where the real loyalty lies. We scheduled the calls immediately. The Henderson CEO didn't waste time on pleasantries. Sebastian, my board was appalled by how you were treated. More importantly, we trust you and your team. Cassandra lost our faith the moment she let her ego override her judgment. If Aurelius Dynamics can replicate the support you gave us, we'll move the contract immediately. It wasn't just Henderson. Within days, contracts worth tens of millions shifted from Whitmore Holdings to our newborn company. Cassandra's response was predictable. She announced a press conference, branding it a strategic restructuring for the new era of Whitmore Holdings. She appeared beneath the glittering chandelier of the main boardroom, dressed in pristine white like some modern empress. Edward sat stiffly at her side, looking less like a partner and more like a hostage. I watched the live stream from our makeshift office, my team crowded around laptops. Whitmore Holdings remains stronger than ever, Cassandra declared, her smile sharp and rehearsed. Recent departures are part of a realignment to ensure agility in a fast-moving market. Our vision is clear, our leadership unified, and our future secure. Her words rang hollow. Reporters pressed her with questions. What about the 28 employees who left alongside Sebastian Whitmore? How do you explain clients already shifting contracts to Aurelius Dynamics? Cassandra dodged with polished deflections, but her mask slipped with every forced smile. At one point, a reporter even laughed aloud when she repeated the phrase, enhanced agility, for the third time. Meanwhile, Catherine streamed our own press briefing live from Eleanor's sunlit conservatory. No chandeliers, no gilded chairs, just a simple backdrop with the Aurelius logo and 28 of us standing shoulder to shoulder. I spoke plainly. Whitmore Holdings once stood for loyalty, but when that was lost, we chose to build something new. At Aurelius Dynamics, we believe culture beats hierarchy, and that trust cannot be manufactured, it must be earned. The contrast was stark. Cassandra, cloaked in luxury, clinging to a faltering narrative. Us, raw but authentic, our unity visible. By the end of the day, social media was ablaze. Screenshots of Cassandra's evasions were spliced beside clips of our straightforward promises. The hashtags AureliusRising and Walkout28 trended for days. But the true blow came on the markets. Whitmore Holdings stock plummeted 10% the week of her press conference, then another 7% after two more clients defected. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Eleanor, her pearls gleaming faintly in the lamplight, as Thomas read aloud the financial headlines. Whitmore Holdings loses major contracts amid leadership exodus. Aurelius Dynamics emerges as challenger startup. Legacy empire faces identity crisis. Eleanor looked at me with a faint smile. You've turned humiliation into a revolution. I shook my head. Not me. We did. Cassandra underestimated the power of loyalty. She thought fear and glamour were enough to rule. But fear fades, and glamour cracks. Loyalty endures. Still, I could not deny the satisfaction. Cassandra had tried to erase me with 5 minutes of humiliation. In less than a month, we had erased her credibility. And the storm was only beginning. Because as Aurelius Dynamics secured more contracts, more whispers reached us, whispers that Whitmore Holdings wasn't just losing clients. It was losing its soul. Employees whispered of Cassandra's temper, of Edward's silence, of board members questioning their choice to back her. The empire she thought she had stolen was rotting from the inside. And for the first time in decades, I felt no chains on my shoulders. Only the weight of possibility. The Marriott Conference Center smelled of polished wood and nervous sweat. Neutral ground, Margaret Ashford insisted. If Cassandra wants to save face, she'll come here. And if she doesn't, she'll reveal her fear. I arrived 10 minutes early, flanked by Victoria and Thomas. Eleanor insisted on joining too, pearls gleaming defiantly against her dark dress. If Cassandra thinks she can shame my husband again, she'll have to look me in the eye. The room was immaculate, a long table gleaming beneath sterile chandeliers, windows overlooking a city Cassandra once believed she owned. She arrived 15 minutes late, draped in ivory silk, Edward at her side. His face was drawn, eyes shadowed, shoulders slumped like a man dragging chains. Cassandra, however, radiated icy confidence. Sebastian, she purred, as though we were old friends meeting for tea. Shall we be civilized? I said nothing. Margaret slid the documents across the table. Terms: acknowledgement of wrongful termination, financial settlement, and release of liability. Cassandra's smile thinned. 1.2 million. 2 years of benefits. Stock vesting. That's more than generous. Generous? Eleanor's voice cut through the room like a blade. You publicly humiliated him. You orchestrated a coup. And now his company Aurelius Dynamics is valued at 50 million in its infancy. You think a check erases that? Edward shifted uncomfortably. Mother, please. Eleanor turned on him, her pearls catching the light. Don't you please me, Edward. You sat silent while your wife dismantled everything your father built. You chose convenience over courage. That silence will follow you for the rest of your life. His face burned crimson. Cassandra's hand gripped his arm, nails digging crescent moons into his skin. At last, Cassandra signed. Her pen scratched the acknowledgement clause with more venom than ink. For a woman who had won her throne through manipulation, this document was a confession: her empire had cracked. When she shoved the papers across the table, our eyes met. She expected triumph. Instead, she saw something worse: indifference. The meeting ended without ceremony. As we stood, Eleanor leaned close enough for only Cassandra to hear. You destroyed your own house, Cassandra. And you won't stop until you've destroyed my son too. Outside, reporters swarmed. They shouted questions, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Cassandra shielded her face. Edward trailed after her, looking less like a prince and more like a prisoner. Meanwhile, Aurelius Dynamics surged. Within weeks, Henderson Logistics, Fairmont Technologies, and Morrison Group had all inked contracts. Catherine Fairchild coordinated a press campaign that framed Aurelius not as a revenge story but as a rebirth. Investors loved it. Clients trusted it. Employees flocked to it. By the end of the quarter, Aurelius was valued at 75 million. Our warehouse headquarters had transformed. The flickering lights were gone, replaced with sleek panels. Rows of ergonomic desks filled the floor. The Morrison twins designed a project management hub that ran like a living organism, humming with efficiency. Gerald, once Whitmore's maintenance man, was now our chief morale officer, striding proudly through the halls with coffee mugs and encouragement. It was messy, loud, imperfect. But it was ours. One evening, as I stood on the mezzanine overlooking the floor, I realized something profound. At Whitmore Holdings, I had always been a custodian of someone else's dynasty. Here, at Aurelius, I was part of a family that chose each other. Eleanor joined me, a glass of champagne in her hand. They're calling you the 5-minute founder, you know. I laughed softly. Because Cassandra gave me 5 minutes to erase my legacy. And you used it to start a new one, she said, raising her glass. Down below, Thomas rallied the team for another late-night push. Catherine fielded a call from Forbes. The Kingsleys argued over code while Sarah Kim strung up fresh plants by the windows. It was alive. Meanwhile, Whitmore Holdings collapsed in slow motion. Reports surfaced of internal chaos, Cassandra screaming at staff, Edward withdrawing into silence, board members leaking damning emails. Clients continued their exodus. Share prices plunged another 15% in a single week. Then came the final blow: the board forced Cassandra out. The official press release cited a desire for new leadership. Everyone knew the truth. Edward stood by her side when she packed her office. But when she turned her glare on him, it was clear their alliance was fraying. She had wanted a throne, he had wanted peace. Neither got what they bargained for. I did not celebrate their downfall. I didn't need to. Defeat was already woven into the choices they'd made. Instead, I celebrated something else: Aurelius's first gala. Not in a gilded hall, but in our renovated warehouse, lit by lanterns and filled with laughter. Employees brought families. Children darted between desks. Eleanor danced with Gerald to a jazz quartet someone had hired last minute. As midnight struck, Victoria raised a glass. To the man who turned 5 minutes of humiliation into a lifetime of triumph. To Sebastian Whitmore. The cheer that followed was louder than any applause I had ever received in those sterile Whitmore boardrooms. I lifted my own glass, meeting their eyes one by one. No, I said firmly. To Aurelius Dynamics. To all of you. For loyalty chosen freely is worth more than any dynasty built on fear. They roared their approval, and I felt it deep in my chest, the warmth of victory not born from revenge, but from renewal. Somewhere across town, Cassandra and Edward sat in their hollow mansion, surrounded by silence. Whitmore Holdings was no more than a footnote now, a cautionary tale whispered in corporate corridors. And I, once given 5 minutes to clear my desk, had gained something far greater, a family, a future, and the knowledge that no dynasty can stand when loyalty is stolen instead of earned. The Whitmore empire was ashes. But Aurelius had risen.